And welcome. And we are on back into the Parsha of Naso, which is the longest Parsha in the Torah and
Mm.
deals with a number of what appear to be diverse subjects. And at this point, we are reading about the Sotah. So let me go ahead and make the bracha before I say anything else. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher kitshanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu la'asok b'divrei Torah.
Amen.
Amen.
And we are actually in the midst of this particular section, which deals with a woman suspected of adultery. And I read an introduction. There is a Mishnah, a piece of oral Torah, a tractate that deals with this subject. And I read from the Art Scroll Mishnah, the introduction to this topic. And when they say a woman suspected of adultery, it sounds in the Torah that, one day the husband gets up or whatever, some afternoon after he's at the club or the pub or the bar or whatever, and all of a sudden he suspects his wife of adultery. No, that is not what we're talking about. What has happened is he has warned his wife not to go by herself, to seclude herself with a certain man. And somebody has seen her do that. Not, they have not been two witnesses. They haven't actually observed an act that could be considered adultery, but there's sufficient evidence that she's gone and secluded herself with this other man. And there's, generally speaking, at least this sense of human nature that if a man and a woman seclude themselves for a certain period of time, something is going to happen. And this is what we're talking about. So she's actually done something to draw suspicion on herself because he's asked her not to do this, and she's still gone ahead and done it. And you have to ask yourself, why? Out of when you have a certain level of faithfulness and loyalty, and you're asked by your partner not to do something like that, and you go ahead and do it anyway. So, on the other hand, there's no certainty that an immoral act has taken place. And so the Torah, in a very unusual series of passages, describes a process by which the woman's innocence or guilt is determined. And essentially, it's about as close to trial by ordeal, which, of course, used to happen in the Middle Ages, and which I would hope we tend to shun these days, as the Torah ever gets. And the Torah does discuss the possibility that she's innocent. And what should happen if she has to go through and degrade herself in the way that the Torah describes? And we are in the midst of just starting to describe that particular process. And the consequences are awful if she is in fact guilty, which is something for us at least to consider in terms of the level of morality going on in our society these days, just in general, and whether or not that's something that is bringing out the most human qualities that we're capable of doing. So I'm trying to think if there's anything else I want to share with you before we actually get into the text. Okay, I think we're going to get into the text itself. So here we are. It's Numbers chapter 5. Okay, and here we go. So the man essentially takes her to the priest. Oh, I know the other thing I did want to tell you, and that is that at a certain point in Jewish history, this happened, I would say, millennia ago, certainly even within the first century or thereabouts, they stopped doing this. They stopped doing it because, unfortunately, the level of morality had gotten so poor, they would have been doing this constantly, and they didn't feel that was appropriate. But I do know for a fact that they stopped this practice, as I said, millennia ago. And it's here, I think, primarily for the lessons we can try and draw from it, and to make some comparisons as far as our level of living and the degree of how sacred it is to be able to act intimately with another person and how sacred that really is. And it isn't, it's a privilege, it's not an entitlement. So, anyway, so this man has brought this woman and he's placed her before a priest, and the priest has placed her in a sense, in the sanctuary area and placed her before God. This is Lifnei Adonai. V'lakacho Cohen mayim kedoshim bechli cheres. The Cohen, should take holy water in an earthenware vessel. Umin, not only that, umin ha'afar asher yeh b'karka hamishkan, and he should take from the earth or the dust which is on the floor of the mishkan, of the tabernacle. Ikach Kohen, the Kohen should take the natan el hamayim, and he should place it in the water. So he's mixing some earth with the water in this earthenware cup. And Rashi goes into some of the symbolism involved here. This is, of course, you can imagine, a very psychological kind of moment, right? Mayim Kadoshim. What do we mean by holy water? Shekidsho bekior, that they had sanctified it in the laver. And just to remind you that right outside the entrance of the tent of meeting, there was a bronze laver with which the priests used to wash their hands and their feet before they performed any act, any sacrificial act, and I would say any holy act that was to take place in the tabernacle. They had to prepare themselves by washing their hands and their feet. So this was water that had come from that laver. And here's the reference in the Talmud to Ketubot Ayin Bet 72. And this is the explanation. Lefi she ne'esa hakior. And the reason for this is that the laver was made, minachoshet marot hatzovot. It was made from the bronze or the brass or the copper, whatever nechoshet means, of the mirrors, marot hatzovot. Okay, so tzovot would mean the women who attended the sanctuary, or essentially the word sava means a gathering of people for the purpose of, generally it's the modern word for army. In other words, that they have a specific purpose. So that is, and Rashi will go on to explain a little significance. So this bronze laver was made out of these bronze mirrors that the women had. So think about the purpose of a mirror, etc. And I have told you this story before. Let's just keep going. Vezo pisha midarchehem. But this one, this particular woman, this sota, has turned away from their ways, Shahayu niv'alot leva'alehem. The reason is because they engaged in cohabitation with their husbands, b'mitzrayim, in Egypt, tachat hatapuach. Literally, I think this is actually a metaphor or an idiom. Literally, it means under the apple, under the apple. But I think the idea here is they did it with a sense of loyalty and holiness and love of one another, and within the sanctity, the bounds of the sanctity of marriage. That's the point, right? Vezo, and this one, this sota, kilkala, she has acted in a depraved way, la'achar la'acher, to another one, kilkala la'acher. She has acted in a depraved, has spoiled herself, you could say, for another, to another man. Tidbak vezo, kilkala la'acher, tidbak bo, oh, tivadek bo. She should be examined through it. So this sense of contrast between the way this woman has behaved and the way these women behaved back in Egypt And I will tell you once again, as I said before, that the story is that back in Egypt, the men didn't want to procreate. They were so upset by Pharaoh's edict, or should I say, edicts, and the life that they were facing, and the fact that they knew that their boy babies were going to be thrown into the Nile, killed, etc., that they didn't want to cohabit at all. And the women said to them, wait a second. Okay, so the boy babies, but what about the girl babies? And they used to go out. The men would be laboring in the field and perspiring and doing all kinds of hard manual labor. And the women would, let me embellish a little bit. They would fix a picnic lunch. They would get dressed and look really beautiful. They'd beautify and adorn themselves. They'd go out in the fields to their husbands, and they would take their mirrors and they would play with the mirrors, and they would shine the mirrors and into their husbands' faces, and then reflect it on themselves. And they would say, and they'd play around with their husbands. They would tease them, and they would say, well, who do you think's more beautiful? And they would get their husbands stimulated. And this is why they wound up getting pregnant. And so this is the mirrors which they used. Clearly, it's understood that our tradition understands the use of a mirror, which of course is symbolic, right, of very kinds of selfish and pride and that kind of stuff. That here it was being used. Here was something being used for a very noble act, for survival. Bechli cheres. This is an earthenware cup. He hishketa et hanoef yayin meshubach bekosot meshubachim. She gave her adulterer, the adulterous man, wine, fine wine to drink in beautiful vessels and beautiful cups, all part of trying to get as much enjoyment, right, out of this illicit act as possible. Lefichach tishte mayim amarim, and for this reason, she drinks the bitter waters, b'mekida bezuya, in a degraded cup, this earthenware cup, shel cheres, of earthenware. Ve'emid hakohen et haisha lifnei Adonai, and the Cohen should place this woman before God, ufara et rosh haisha, and he should, basically what it means is mess up her hair, right? He should disentangle, or I shouldn't say disentangle, but he should mess up literally it means the head of the woman, but it really means it has to do with letting loose her hair, making it look really messy. Rashi's going to help us understand this. Ve'emid hakohen v'gomer. So it says the priest shall make her stand, etc. Va'alo kvar ne'emar. But wait a second, Rashi says, it's already said, Ve'emid lifnei Hashem. We read it in that previous verse. He shall place her, he shall make her stand before God. Ella misi'in hayu oto. But what they would do is they would help her, but not in a helpy kind of way, right? They would basically push her around, mimakom lamakom, from one place to the next. So they would kind of manhandle her, kedei liyag'a, in order to tire her out, v'titaref da'ata, and she should start getting upset, v'toda v'tivadeh, and she should confess. So if she confessed, then she would not go through this process. And whether or not that confession would be, coming from a place where she was saying, I didn't do it, but I am only suspecting, I do not know for certain, but I suspect that we're talking about confessing her sin. Ufara, right? He should mess up, right? This is from the tractate Sota. There we are, page 14a, or the Sifrei, which is the commentary, the Tanaitic commentary on the book of Numbers and Deuteronomy. It's an early, um, analysis midrash, halachic midrash, that is to say, it now analyzes the laws in these books. Soter et kliat sa'ara. So what it basically means is he undoes the braids of her hair. Kedei livazota, right? And in order to degrade her. Mikan livnot Yisrael. And this is where we derive that the daughters of Israel, shigalui harosh genai lahem, that for them to expose their heads, in other words, to go bareheaded, genai lahem, it's considered to be shameful, something like that. They find that they would not feel, it would not be a complimentary kind of thing. It would be just the opposite. Lifnei Hashem, before Hashem, before God. What do we mean by that? And again, this is from the Sifrei. Bisha'ar Nicanor. So there was a gate in the temple that was known as Nicanor's gate. And if you can visualize this with me, right, we know that the temple courtyard was divided into two parts. There was a part, I believe it was on the eastern side, that basically we look at the temple as a rectangle if we're looking at it from the bird's eye view. And on the eastern side, there was a courtyard with steps going up to a wall, a partition wall, which had gates in it. And I believe the Nicanor gate was one of those gates. And the reason it was called Nicanor's gate has to do with the man who donated this gate. And there's a story behind that, which I will not share at this particular point. We can do it another time. Oh, so here we go. Here we go. He's explaining which gate it was. Thank you, Rashi. You anticipated my concern. Husha'ar ha'azara. And by the way, of course, my short-term memory. All right. It is the gate of the courtyard, Hamizrachi, on the eastern side, Derech Kol Hanichnasim, the way in which all the people went in. Now, that means that I was in error if I'm mistaken, because Mizrach, of course, is the Eastern. So it sounds, maybe, I don't know. I still tend to think that it was one of those gates that divided the women's court from the inner court, the court that was where the sanctuary building was actually located. But this sounds like it was an entrance. But what happened was, the Israelites, if you weren't a Cohen, you were not supposed to be in that inner court. However, there was a platform on the other side of that wall so that you could go up these steps and go onto this platform and see what was going on in that inner courtyard. So I tend to still feel it was one of those gates. And certainly it still would have been on the eastern side of that major courtyard. So he just says ha'azara, right? But ha'azara ha'mizrachi, that's the question. Does this go together? And that could be. So, because the eastern courtyard would have been the court of the women. But he doesn't call it that. Ezrat HaNashim, interestingly enough. Okay, so let's go on. Yeah, we did not finish the sentence, right? Okay, so let's finish the sentence. Venatan al kapeha, and he should place on her hands 8 minchat hazikaron. This mincha, this meal offering of remembrance, minat kinaot hi. This is a meal offering of jealousy. Uvayad hakohen yiyu, and in the hands of the priest would be me hamarim hamaorarim. Notice, by the way, the play on words here, the waters that were bitter and cursed, meaning capable of bringing a curse. So this mincha, of course, having to do with this jealousy that this husband feels. Right? Okay, so let's go on to this. Benatan al kapeha, he shall place them on her hands. Leyig'a, again, to tire her out. Ulai titaref da'ata, here we go. Once again, right? She will get upset, right? She won't be able, she'll lose her composure. How's that? V'tivadeh, and she will again acknowledge v'lo yimche shem hamiyuchad, because, and it's saying, and so that the unique name will not be blotted out al hamayim, in the water. So we are anticipating, assuming that you already know what is going to happen. And so what happens essentially is that the priest writes a formula which contains the name of God in it. He then takes the parchment or whatever it is, I can't say really slip of paper, right? On which this formula is written, and he puts it into the water so that the ink dissolves. But it also, of course, means that the name of God is dissolving, and we consider that, of course, to be a very improper way to behave. So the hope is that she will confess. There won't be a need to do that. Hamarim, the bitter. Why they called bitter? Al Shem Sufan. They're called bitter because of what is going to happen as a result of drinking them. Shehem Marim La, because they are going to be bitter to her. We're going to have a description of what happens to the woman if she is guilty and what these waters do to her. Hama Orarim, the cursed waters. Ha Mechasrim Ota Min Haolam. They take her away from the world, Lashon, this is a language, this is the same expression in Ezekiel 28, okay? Silon mamir. So this sounds like a stream, and here's the word.
Could you try again?
My computer thought I said Siri and didn't hear me say stream. I will try again, though, without her help. So, a cursed stream? V'lo yitachen lefaresh mayim ararim. So that's interesting. He says it is not appropriate to explain this or to translate this as cursed waters. So waters of a curse. So let's keep going. That produce a curse. That's yeah, and the hifil is a sounds like a trying to think, is it a PL form or rare? No, it sounds like a hifil form, which is causative. Shaharei Kedushim. Why don't you want to call them cursed? Shaharei Kedushim, because they are sanctified. Velo arurim, and they're not cursed. So the waters that produce katav hakatuv. So velo arurim katav hakatuv ela me'orarim. So it says, notice carefully, Rashi says, that scripture didn't describe it as curse, which would be arurim, but me'orarim, et acherim. So he's saying it's a causative form. It brings a curse on others. For af unculus, and he says not only that, but if you look carefully, even unculus, Lord tirkem litaya. Late is a word in Aramaic that means to curse, and he did not translate it as cursed waters, Ella melatataya. He uses a similar form in Aramaic that is a hifil, a causative form. She marot klala begufa, right? So apparently, let me look. I mean, certainly this marot, okay, or I think meraot klala. I'm not certain. There are no vowels in here to help me, right? But here it would mean display. Laharot would mean to display. Klala, a curse, begufa shelzu, in the body of this one. So, yes, I didn't see if someone has a question or a comment at this point. All right, let's keep going. V'hishbia otah Cohen. And again, this is a hifil, a causative form. It says, and the Cohen, the priest, should cause her to swear, make her swear. V'amar el ha'isha, and he should say to the woman. And notice, by the way, that this is put negatively. He doesn't say positively, if you did lie. He said, if you did not lie. Im lo shachav ish, okay, otach. If a man did not lie with you, ve'im lo satit tum'ah tachat ishech, right? And it says, and if you did not, and I'm going to translate this as make yourself impure in the place of your husband, right? In other words, and turn astray, right? Turn astray in an impure way in the presence of your husband, not literally presence, or instead of your husband, right? Hinaki mimei hamarim hamorim. So look at this. It's all put in a positive sense. May you be cleansed from these waters hamaorim of cursing, something like that, right? We're going to try and be consistent with how Rashi told us. Ha'ela, these. So notice it's not a normal sort of way you should be cursed because you did this. It's rather put negatively in the sense. Hold on one
Didn't
second.
the priest when she drank the waters of frustration, she drank these waters of curse, her belly extended and
Okay,
her legs extended.
Harlan, you're anticipating.
Oh,
Okay.
sorry.
That's the curse. You're now starting to define what the curse is. Okay, but we haven't gotten there yet. We will get there eventually. Quite possibly this week we will. But thank you. No. We're going to do this a step at a time. Okay. So I wanted to be sure to try and translate this for you and how he's putting it, and I understand he's trying to put it positively. You know, he's making the presumption of innocence in the way he's saying this. V'at ki satit tachat hashech, v'chi nitmet. Now he goes on to say, but if you indeed turned aside from your husband, v'chi nitmet, and if indeed you defiled yourself, v'yiten ish bach et shovto, and
This is a reminder.
Okay, I think somebody has to mute. That's not coming from me, I don't think. All right. And a man has placed within him his seed, shovto, his literally means his lying. But it of course means that he's had intercourse with her. Okay. Mi balade isha, ishech, other than your own husband. So let's go on this. Va'at kisatit. Ki mishalesh belashon im. So ki can mean because, but Rashi says here it does not mean because. It means if. Lashon im, right? Ki can also mean employ the language of if, and that's what he's saying. But because it could be understood as and you since you, right? Since you did, but it doesn't mean that. It means if you did. And we will stop here. And with God's help, we will continue tomorrow. Oops, I don't know why it's doing that. Okay. I'm going to stop the share. Any comments before we move on? Before I stop recording?
Well, what if the woman is innocent?
We will see. I'm going to keep you in suspense. The Torah absolutely considers that possibility. And on that positive note, I am going to Stop the recording.